Biden administration gave China intelligence about Russia. What did China do with it? You'll never guess. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Last week, Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden had been warning about this for weeks ahead of Russia's attack. Look, no one wants a war. Okay, almost no one wants a war. But some of what the Biden administration did to try and prevent a war was less than helpful. Namely, begging the Chinese Communist Party to help. That's according to anonymous U.S. officials who spoke to the New York Times. Over 3 months, senior Biden administration officials held half a dozen urgent meetings with top Chinese officials. During those meetings, the Americans presented intelligence showing Russia's troop buildup around Ukraine and beseeched the Chinese to tell Russia not to invade. So how did that work out? I'm going to say, not well. You know, everyone would be better off if U.S. government officials just watched China Uncensored. Because I've been talking for years about how Chinese leader Xi Jinping and Russian leader Vladimir Putin have had a bromance for the ages. They've met 38 times as world leaders, just doing what bros do, like watching the game, making some pancakes, buying each other jewelry. You don't give this kind of bling to just any old friend. You give it to your best friend. Oh, look, they even wore matching ties. In fact, cementing their BFF status, Xi and Putin have even celebrated their birthdays together, like the time Putin gave Xi his favorite Russian ice cream from his best and bosom friend, or the time that Xi sliced some sausage and drank vodka with Putin for his birthday party in Bali. It's the Hangover sequel no one wanted. So since Xi and Putin are so close, what made U.S. officials think the Chinese leader would try to stop Putin from invading Ukraine? Well, it's partly because they were so close. If any world leader could make Putin think twice about invading Ukraine, it was Mr. Xi, went the thinking of some U.S. officials. Here's how I imagine the thinking of some U.S. officials. You know who would be great at convincing Putin not to take territory he views as historically part of his country? Xi Jinping, who's currently trying to take territory he views as historically part of his country. That sounds like a great idea that'll definitely work. So how did Chinese officials respond when U.S. officials tried to tell them Russia was going to invade Ukraine? They said they didn't think it was going to happen. And then, in a stunning move that everyone should have seen coming, Chinese officials told Russia what the U.S. was doing. After one diplomatic exchange in December, U.S. officials got intelligence showing Beijing had shared the information with Moscow, telling the Russians that the United States was trying to sow discord and that China would not try to impede Russian plans and actions. In other words, the U.S. shared intelligence with China, who then turned around and shared that intelligence with Russia. I'm shocked. So to sum up what happened, U.S. officials tried to tell China, hey, your BFF is about to do something stupid. You should try to get him to stop. Then China turned around and told Russia, hey, that jerk America is trash-talking you. Don't worry, bro, we got your back. Why did U.S. officials think this was a good idea? Well, it came out of Biden's meeting with Xi Jinping last November. After the meeting, American officials decided that the Russian troop buildup around Ukraine presented the most immediate problem that China and the United States could try to defuse together. This is a fundamental misreading of the goals of the Chinese Communist Party. If the party sees a way to undermine the U.S. and get away with it, it's going to undermine the U.S., which it did by refusing to help and then telling Russia. And that's something at least some U.S. officials don't understand. Some officials thought the outcome of the Biden-Xi video summit indicated there was potential for an improvement in U.S.-China relations. Okay, let me say it one more time for the people in the back. The Chinese Communist Party believes America is its enemy. There's not going to be an improvement in U.S.-China relations, unless you think that getting China to go back to undermining America in secret instead of to our face is an improvement, which it's not. The good news is at least some US officials are less naive about China. Sounds like it was the skeptical US officials who leaked this story to the New York Times. Speaking of, why did US officials leak the story to the Times in the first place? More after the break. Welcome back. Last week, the New York Times published a story about how the Biden administration got played by the Chinese Communist Party. So why did Biden administration officials even leak that story to the Times? To embarrass the Chinese regime. U.S. officials come off as trying to make a genuine effort to work with Chinese officials who instead dismiss and betray them. It makes the Chinese Communist Party look untrustworthy, which it is. Whether being called out will embarrass the Chinese Communist Party is another story. But when it comes to Ukraine, the Chinese regime has been trying to have their cake and eat it too, which the New York Times publicizing this story makes it harder for them to do. On one hand, the Chinese regime wants to reassure Russia of their support. Last week, after he invaded Ukraine, Putin called Xi and told him it was all America and NATO's fault. And Xi replied that Russia's legitimate security concerns, as well as the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries, should be respected. Notice that China never says which country's territorial integrity. Are they talking about Ukraine or Russia? And that's because the Chinese regime is also trying to come off as a possible peacemaker in Ukraine, while at the same time refusing to say that Russia's actions in Ukraine are an invasion. The Chinese Communist Party wants to support Russia because it's fighting against the West. Putin's line about how this is America and NATO's fault is exactly what the Chinese Communist Party has been saying too. While Putin hates NATO because he feels it threatens Russia, the Chinese regime also hates NATO, partly because of NATO's accidental bombing of a Chinese embassy during the Serbian War, and also because NATO has called China a growing threat. On the other hand, the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want to get blowback from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China has a fairly good relationship with Ukraine. Ukraine is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, and one of many countries that's been called China's bridge to Europe. Ukraine is the largest exporter of corn to China. And back in 2013, China signed a deal to lease 5% of Ukraine's land over the next 50 years to grow food for China. China also has a lot of Belt and Road infrastructure projects in Ukraine, including a Eurasian railway that's now probably dead thanks to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Some analysts have said the Chinese regime is going to have a hard time supporting Russia's invasion because they've recognized Ukraine as a sovereign country. And China accuses America of interfering with China's sovereignty whenever it talks about Tibet or Xinjiang or Taiwan, so if China doesn't condemn Russia for interfering with Ukraine's sovereignty, that would be hypocritical. But that's a fundamental misreading of the Chinese Communist Party. Hypocrisy is their superpower. Also, and this is key, the Chinese regime doesn't see this as a war between Russia and Ukraine. They see it as a war between Russia and America. That's why the Chinese internet is cheering on Russia's invasion. Putin's portrayal of Russia as a victim of the West's political, ideological, and military aggression has resonated deeply with many on social media. So ideologically, the Chinese Communist Party sees supporting Russia as standing up to America, which makes it hard for them to back down. There's only one thing that could make them. More on that after the break. Welcome back. Last month, ahead of the Olympics, Chinese leader Xi Jinping met with Vladimir Putin. Instead of having ice cream or pancakes or sausages, they celebrated their friendship by issuing a joint statement, saying that their friendship has no limits and no forbidden areas of cooperation. They also cemented their economic ties, with China agreeing to buy oil, coal, and wheat from Russia. It's almost like they were trying to get ahead of international sanctions due to a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Actually, that was a big question. Did China know Russia was about to invade Ukraine? Some argue China was caught unprepared, in part because they didn't evacuate their citizens from Ukraine. But that could also be because the Chinese regime, like Putin, thought the invasion of Ukraine would be over very quickly, which has not been the case. I don't know why people are so surprised that a comedian was able to rally people to stand up against authoritarian power. There were also reports that Xi Jinping had asked Putin not to invade until after the Olympics, which he kind of did. I mean, no one cares about the Paralympics anyway. There's no way to know for sure whether China actually got a heads up from Russia about their invasion. Remember, the Chinese Communist Party sees this as Russia against America, and America is their enemy, which means so far I'm not seeing any cracks in their support for each other against the West. The one thing that could change that is economic sanctions. There are signs that some of China's state-owned banks are trying to avoid being sanctioned for supporting Russia. Of course, China and Russia were prepared for some sanctions, but they probably weren't expecting the US and Europe to impose sanctions so quickly and harshly. And while Xi may support Putin personally as a friend and ideologically as an anti-American ally, that might change if sanctions threaten to destabilize the Chinese economy. After all, Xi Jinping needs a good economy so he can become presidentator for life later this year. And if he has to say goodbye to his BFF to do it, well, that's a sacrifice he's willing to make. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a member of the China Uncensored 50-Cent Army, a fan of the show who supports us on the crowdfunding website Patreon or the exclusive social media platform Locals. Benadryl Life asks on Locals, will we ever get a Russia Uncensored? I only ask because of recent worldly affairs. Well, Benadryl Life, we are planning to watch several new shows this year, but Russia Uncensored is not one of them. Before you get too disappointed, I'd say that you got some Russia Uncensored right here in this episode. And we'll be talking more on China Uncensored about how Russia's invasion of Ukraine affects China. And if you want even more, we're covering Russia a lot right now on our other channel, America Uncovered. Yes, we have another show where we cover America stuff too, including Russia's invasion of Ukraine, since that's all America's fault, according to Russia and China. Thanks for your question, Benadryl Life, and thanks for supporting China Uncensored on Locals. And if you haven't joined us on Locals, come check it out. Locals is a free speech social media platform where we'll never get censored for exposing the Chinese Communist Party. It's free to join, but if you become one of our monthly supporters, you get even more perks, like being able to chat with me and the rest of the team and getting your questions answered here on the show. Plus, we do exclusive content like our Locals-only live streams. Find out more at ChinaUncensored.locals.com. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching this episode of China Uncensored.